This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Prominent presidential historian Julian Zelizer reflects on Jimmy Carter's legacy as the former president turns 91 years old. As President Obama imposes new anti-smog rules, Hillary Clinton comes out against the Keystone pipeline, and Shell Oil departs the Arctic Circle, energy expert Michael Levi explains the economics of energy production. And Congresswoman Jackie Speier tells Bill Press she expects a government shutdown just before Christmas. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Historian Julian Zelizer says Jimmy Carter cares deeply about policy, and there was no way he was going to sit quietly during his post-presidency. And we say hello to Julian Zelizer, professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University and the author of, amongst many publications, but The Fierce Urgency of Now, Lyndon Johnson, Congress, and the Battle for the Great Society. Julian Zelizer, thanks very much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Jimmy Carter, now 91 years old, generally well regarded now, but wasn't he regarded as pretty much a failed president?
He was. By 1980, many Democrats want nothing to do with him. He is seen as a terrible, damaging image for the party, a failed president who demonstrated to many Americans why Democrats shouldn't be given control of the White House. Republicans hated him as the epitome, in their minds, of an excessively liberal Democrat who consistently did the wrong thing. And many independents and moderates simply came to the conclusion that he didn't have the skills that were necessary to lead the country, especially through the crises that the U.S. was facing. So he was seen as a failed president, and that's really what Reagan runs on. As much as he runs on conservative ideas, in 1980 he runs against Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm. What were some of President Carter's big successes, and are they in fact looking better as time goes by?
His big successes included introducing new ethics reforms in the federal government and the executive branch that were very much desired in the aftermath of Watergate, such as the creation of an independent prosecutor who, until the law expired, would be responsible for investigating wrongdoing in the executive branch. He introduces and passes energy reform legislation that is meant to wean the nation away from its dependence on oil, which I think was an important development and accomplishment, even if he didn't get a lot of what he wanted. And then on foreign policy, two issues. One is the entrenchment of human rights as a central part of what the State Department does and how we devise our foreign policy, and the Camp David Accord, which was a historic peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, which has lasted since that time.
Do you think, as some people have said, he lucked into the presidency after Ford pardoned Nixon? Many people don't realize that Ford was actually surging at the end of the campaign and nearly won.
Well, it's true. I mean, when Ford pardons Nixon, it's absolutely devastating to him and to the GOP. Many polls showed that Americans liked Ford. They believed this was the person who could bring the country together and move it beyond Watergate. And the pardon had a horrible effect. Many people thought there had been a corrupt deal between Ford and Nixon. Many people just thought he had done basically the wrong thing, regardless of his motivation. And that opened up room for Democrats to bring Watergate back into the equation and talk about trust in government. But he took advantage of that. Many Democrats, 17 Democrats, ran in the 76 primaries, and none of them, other than Carter, really was able to capitalize and figure out how to use this theme to win the nomination. So he ran a really effective campaign. He also understood the way in which the primaries and caucuses were working by the mid-1970s, and we can't forget just how skillful he was in putting this all together and winning the White House.
He was a lot more savvy a politician than he's given credit for, was he not?
Oh, yes. I think, now there's an image because of how the presidency unfolded that he was someone who didn't really know what he was doing and he had no leadership or political savvy, but that's just not true. The primaries are this example I often talk about of a very good campaign that really understood how to win in a changing system, which is something you can't do unless you're politically astute. It was not unlike Obama in 2008. And early in his presidency, he has some big victories, such as the signing and ratification of the Panama Canal treaties, which were very unpopular. Many Americans didn't like it, and many senators were scared to agree to this. But he figured out a way to twist arms and convince senators to go through with this. So I think we forget who he was and have created a myth about his incompetence, which isn't based on the facts.
We're speaking with Julian Zelizer, professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University, here on americasdemocrats.org. Was there a little hypocrisy in Carter asking Americans to trust him to shake up Washington and then appointing establishment figures like Cyrus Vance or Zbigniew Brzezinski, Schlesinger, a couple of cronies like Burt Lance, Griffin Bell?
There is something to that. I think that's a good point. And that's connected to this idea that he was just an outsider or a Georgia peanut farmer who didn't, know anything and won. He wasn't that. He had been governor. He had been in the state Senate. He was very politically shrewd. And I think when he brings in people from the Washington establishment, all the figures who you mentioned, it showed he had a better sense of what he was doing, and he was not totally disconnected from Washington. It was in many ways a political strategy, and it was only an element of his presidency, but he was also very willing to work within Washington to achieve change.
What value does a former president bring to the world stage, and don't they actually run the risk of kind of getting in the way?
They do, and this has happened to him. I think that, he has been the most active post-president really that we've had, I think even more than Bill Clinton, and he reimagined what a post-president could do with his power to deal and discuss and actually solve international problems. But many presidents, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, often found that he was a problem they had to deal with. Because the thing about Carter is what people like about him is he does what he thinks, he moves forward on issues that matter to him, but he doesn't listen to other politicians. This has always been an aspect of how he works. And so we've seen many presidents who see him as someone who is either getting in the way of foreign policy changes that were needed or is trying to take credit for things that the administration was doing. So it has been a danger. I think he'd argue he doesn't really care about that, and he's content with the role he's played.
So why does Jimmy Carter become so involved in human rights, social activism, and foreign policy in his post-presidency instead of just taking up painting, Eisenhower, George W. Bush?
Well, that's not who he is. I mean, he is a person who is both full of energy throughout his life, and at the same time, he is a person, whether you like him or dislike him and whatever you think of his positions, who cares deeply about policy. He really does. And a lot of the issues he has focused on grow out of what he did as president. And I think that there was just no way he was going to sit quietly and not try to tackle these issues when he had that kind of influence. And there's part of him who feels that he didn't achieve everything he wanted to when he was president because of how things ended. And I think there's part of him that has continued to try to end that presidency successfully, even though he's no longer in the White House.
Do you think President Carter's standing might rise in the future, as did Harry Truman's, one of his political heroes?
It could. I mean, I think, the reality is with most presidents, the way we think about them changes very dramatically. We learn about things we didn't know. We see events in different perspectives, and we're already seeing some of that with Jimmy Carter. So I think as we move forward in time and international conditions change and we look at what he does as post-president, I think he will get more credit than he did in the past.
Okay. Julian Zelizer, Professor of History and Public Affairs at Princeton University, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Julian, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Energy expert Michael Levi downplays the controversy over the Keystone pipeline and says both sides are blowing its importance out of proportion. We'll talk to him more about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
If a picture is worth 1,000 words, here's one worth 1,000 times that. It's a shot of 3 Volkswagen board members gathered for a press conference to announce the resignation of VW's CEO. He had just been forced out by the auto giant's scandal of having rigged its diesel cars with secret software so the vehicles could spew 4,000% more toxic pollutants into the air than allowed by law. The picture showed the lead VW spokesman looking like he was gagging, as though he had just swallowed a live toad. One grim-faced fellow board member was glaring at the gagger in ill-disguised disgust, and the other is nervously looking straight into the photographer's camera as if pleading, "Please tell me this isn't happening, and please, please, keep me out of the picture." It's a perfect portrait of a shameful corporate crime, with these highly paid overseers essentially confessing that corporations don't commit crimes, their executives do. Yet the 3 board members still played the corporate game, referring to Volkswagen's deliberate deception of millions of car buyers as irregularities, and suggesting that some mysterious villains had installed the malicious software without the top bosses knowing it. This is Jim Hightower saying, horse feathers! 11 million VWs and Audis were tampered with in the past 6 years. Either these overseers knew what was going on, or they've been derelict in their sworn duty to prevent corporate abuse. Volkswagen has long been known for strict top-down decision-making, with even minor matters requiring the okay of its governing officials. And VW's premeditated systemic betrayal of consumer trust, plus its flagrantly illegal poisoning of our air for 6 years, is hardly a minor matter. No wonder the photogenic blame dodgers look like deer caught in a VW's headlights.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Michael Levi, a senior fellow at the Council for Foreign Relations, says we focus too much attention on the telegenic rather than the important environmental aspects of energy production. And we say hello to Michael Levi, senior fellow for Energy and Environment at the Council on Foreign Relations, also the author of The Power Surge, Energy, Opportunity, and the Battle for America's Future. Michael Levi, thank you for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
My pleasure.
You recently wrote a controversial article suggesting that environmentalists and progressives may be wrong in opposing fracking. So what is the case for fracking?
The case for fracking is pretty straightforward. The United States has an electricity system dominated by coal, which produces roughly 1/3 of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. Natural gas produced through fracking has roughly half the greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions, when burned, as coal does. So to the extent that we can replace coal with natural gas, we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and we reduce local air pollution around the power plants as well.
Now, from the point of view of the average consumer, apart from ideology, is the argument for relying on natural gas primarily about cost, or is it about climate change?
I think for the average consumer, natural gas is already restraining their electricity bills. I think you have to look at climate change and cost at the same time. Policymakers are often willing to have consumers pay a bit more for their electricity in return for improving environmental outcomes. But they're not willing to have massive increases in electricity prices. That's not politically tenable. What natural gas lets them do is drive lower carbon emissions through the system while not incurring massive additional cost burdens, because that incremental cost for switching from coal to gas is relatively small. Now, this doesn't mean that natural gas is the solution to the climate problem, and so I don't love the word relying when I think about that. You have increasingly cost-effective renewable options. You have a host of energy efficiency options. With the right price on carbon, you might incentivize investment in nuclear power. So there's a range of different possibilities there. But if I look at the last 5 years, the biggest difference between 5 years ago and now is that natural gas is abundantly available domestically as a lower emissions alternative to coal.
Has natural gas already overtaken coal as the main source of electrical power in the country?
It hasn't. If you look at annual averages, and the sources of electricity vary over the course of the year, if you look at annual averages, natural gas still contributes substantially less than coal does. During the occasional month, natural gas passes coal. It passed coal a few months ago. It came close to passing coal a few years ago, but those were for 1 month intervals. And if you look at mainstream projections, natural gas on an annual average doesn't pass coal for some years into the future, and possibly for a very long time, unless we have new policy that penalizes greenhouse gas emissions. Which
might make sense for why you see so much pressure being put on by the coal industry to hey, leave us alone and let us keep producing. We're speaking with Michael Levi, a senior fellow for energy and the environment at the Council on Foreign Relations, also the author of The Power Surge, Energy Opportunity and the Battle for America's Future. So what about the argument that even if it does produce cheaper and cleaner energy, fracking costs as much as would be saved in terms of both cost and pollutants?
I don't think that's true. Certainly when you compare natural gas to coal, if you add in the climate damages from each, natural gas, or using considerably more gas than we do now and considerably less coal, is a cost-effective switch. I also think that in a large slice of the country, if you compare natural gas, even with the carbon burden, to wind or solar at its current cost, absent subsidies, you still get an advantage much of the time for natural gas. I think the big thing to be wary of when it comes to gas is not that it's going to be exorbitantly expensive. It's that there are large local environmental challenges that come with producing that natural gas. You have water challenges, air challenges. You have seismic activity, small earthquakes generated by disposal of water produced from fracking. If it's done poorly, you have transformation of communities. So to me, that's really the piece that we need to get right, and frankly the environmental community needs to tackle right, and industry needs to tackle right if gas is going to be a large and growing part of the solution to climate change.
Well, and you just touched on something there that, fracking relies on huge amounts of water to be pumped into the earth. How realistic is that, especially given water shortages in parts of the country? And also, isn't fracking a well-documented hazard to drinking water? I mean, you see video of people holding a lighter to a stream and it flames up.
So there are two pieces there. First, there is the water shortage question. And right now, areas have been able to balance natural gas development with water needs. I mean, you see big problems in California, but you don't have a lot of fracking there. Companies are improving recycling of water as well. But ultimately, water should be priced. And companies should only be able to use a lot of water if it works into the bottom line. Right now, though, to be frank, the water tensions are primarily between consumers and agriculture rather than between those and the energy industry. On the pollution side, I think we focus on the telegenic part rather than the part that matters most. The videos you see of people lighting their water on fire are typically from natural methane seeps. So you actually have methane, which is the primary constituent of natural gas, present in a lot of drinking water naturally. And so you've had that phenomenon for a long time, predating fracking. That's not to say there haven't been some cases of methane contamination. We need to have strong, well-enforced rules for making sure that wells are prepared properly. But the bigger problem, as best we can tell, is if people sloppily dispose of the water that comes back out of the ground after they do the fracking, which contains a lot of pollutants, that can be a water quality problem. And even more mundane things, like when you want to drill a well, you clear a big flat area of dirt in order to put your rigs there. And if you do that in a sloppy way and you have a big storm, you get enormous amounts of dirt running off into rivers, creating a lot of polluting sediment. So that's not nearly as exciting. You can't have a great video of sediment getting into a river and changing the readings on someone's test equipment. But that doesn't mean that it's not the sort of thing that we actually need to make sure isn't happening.
So do we require more regulation as far as that goes then? I mean, are people just kind of shooting from the hip on this right now, and perhaps we need to rein it in? So
there are a variety of regulations at the state level that already govern production, and I think they're going to often be critical because each state has its own distinct challenges. But there is an important role for federal regulation, both because uniformity can be valuable and because the federal regulators may have greater capacity to enforce the regulations. Right? A regulation can sound great on paper, but if you don't or can't enforce it, it's not worth all that much. So there are cases where federal regulation makes sense, for example, on disclosure of contents of fracking fluids, and that would benefit everyone. It's the kind of thing where if one company has to do it but another doesn't, you're going to have commercial issues, but if everyone has to, it's not such a big problem. There are others where the activities in one state can harm another, and that is typically the rationale for federal regulation. So if improper disposal of wastewater triggers seismic activity from one state, we all know that tremors don't stay within state lines, and so they can have an impact in other states, and that's a very good, that's the kind of situation where typically you look to the federal government to regulate.
Again, we're speaking with Michael Levi, Senior Fellow for Energy and the Environment at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's also the author of The Power Surge, Energy, Opportunity, and the Battle for America's Future, joining us today here on americasdemocrats.org. So what about, I mean, haven't the energy companies already harvested that cheap, low-hanging fruit of shale gas, and that by costing more and more to extract, fracking then comes to an end without government intervention?
So I think that the companies have taken this low-hanging fruit when it comes to coal to gas switching. And that's why, absent regulation like in the final Clean Power Plan that the Obama administration has released, absent that kind of regulation, you're going to stall out in a substantial further coal to gas transition. So that's why you need to drive things that way using policy. Do we run out? I mean, no one knows for sure how much resource there is, but the best estimates indicate that there is a lot available at a relatively low cost. Now, I don't want to place all our bets on that. I would not be in favor of a regulation that said you have to turn every coal plant into a gas plant, because that would put us at too great risk of additional costs if gas turned out to be more expensive. I think what we need is something, again, that penalizes sources for their greenhouse gas emissions. Ideally, we would have a carbon price that Congress passed. That's not in the political cards. And so what we're seeing from the administration is the Clean Power Plan is a step that essentially does that. It does its best approximation of penalizing coal, penalizing gas a bit, and not penalizing zero carbon sources. And if gas is cheap, that's going to drive a lot more gas uptake. And if gas turns out to be expensive, that's going to drive a lot more efficiency in renewables and maybe nuclear as well. And the market will sort out what the cheapest way of reducing our emissions is under that sort of a plan.
Mm-hmm. And before we let you go, what are your thoughts? I mean, what do you think will be the outcome of the debate over the Keystone pipeline? And is there a case to be made for it?
I turned in my prediction license for the Keystone pipeline years ago. I think I don't think there's anyone in the business of predicting what will happen with the Keystone pipeline who has gotten things consistently right. And so I'd like to think I've at least learned not to try.
But do you think there's a case for it?
I think that there is a case for allowing large infrastructure projects to be built if they pass a cost-benefit test, including the impact of climate change. I think that the Keystone pipeline has been blown out of proportion by all sides of the debate. I think it's fairly inconsequential environmentally and economically. This is a relatively small amount of oil within a very large global market. And so my guess is that the decision on the Keystone pipeline will ultimately have very little impact on emissions or on the price of oil.
Okay, very good. Michael Levi, Senior Fellow for Energy and the Environment at the Council on Foreign Relations and the author of The Power Surge, Energy Opportunity and the Battle for America's Future. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Me too.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Congresswoman Jackie Speier of California.
It's nice being on Capitol Hill because we can convince our friends to stop by on the way to work, like Congresswoman Jackie Speier, good friend from California, still in town for another few hours before you head back to California. Hello, Congresswoman. Nice to see you.
Good morning to you, Bill.
We celebrated the fact that early in the week we learned that they discovered there is water on Mars. Do you think we could get some of that to California?
Oh, jeez, yeah. Come on.
At some point.
Yeah, right.
Not in our lifetime.
Not in our lifetime, but, man, we could use it in California, though.
Could you see these space-suited persons taking water from Mars?
Bringing it from Mars.
No, it makes more sense to just create a new pipeline. Instead of the Keystone pipeline, we need a pipeline from the Northeast into California.
To get some of that. Yeah, right.
Really?
Get some of that water with Hurricane Joaquin heading up the coast. So, Congresswoman, the government is not going to shut down.
Not this week.
Yeah. It's sort of
like a day basis.
It's like kind of a good news, bad news story, isn't it?
You know, I have a major event scheduled in my district on December 11th, which I have to cancel now because I am convinced.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm a pessimist. I don't think I am. But I think that there's no question that unless there is some lobotomies done on some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, that we will shut down. I don't think this Freedom Caucus is going to be happy until they see blood.
They have to be feeling their oats, right, after
Exactly.
running John Boehner out of town, that they're not going to roll over,
Yeah,
right?
I think some people will say, oh, well, now they feel like they've got their
pound of flesh
yeah.
or what? No, they're going to want more.
That's exactly right.
And so in December, it's the budget and the debt ceiling, both.
Right. Both. Double whammy.
Right up until the end. So I asked Congressman Mark Buchan was in a little bit earlier, and I asked him this question, whether as things have been so dysfunctional under John Boehner and just basically across the board, a refusal to really deal with the important issues, not even a vote on immigration reform or the minimum wage and all of that, whether things are going to get better or worse with John Boehner gone.
I don't think they necessarily get better. I mean, give him credit for, turning the House over to the Republicans and then gaining, another 60 members on top of it.
Yeah,
I mean, pretty remarkable. Raised a lot of money. He's actually a decent human being.
Mm-hmm, I agree.
And so I think that he had enough after trying to convince these 29 Freedom Caucus members, who I guess float from 29 to 31, that it wasn't worth it. And if, in fact, you believe what he says, he was going to resign on his birthday, why not do it now and save, a shutdown?
You mentioned the members of the Freedom Caucus. We always use the phrase, the tail wagging the dog. Mark Buchanan would say, the problem is there's no dog left, right? It's just the tail that's kind of running everything. And it seems that way. Now, it looks like Kevin McCarthy from California, which is interesting, as a Democratic leader, the Republican leader, both from California, that he looks like will be the next speaker. And people, haven't gotten to know, they don't really know who Kevin McCarthy is. So he pops up on Sean Hannity night before last, and we get a first look at Kevin McCarthy and what his agenda sort of may be all about. And he was asked about Hillary Clinton and the emails. Here's Kevin McCarthy.
Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, right? But we put together a Benghazi special committee, a select committee. What are her numbers today? Her numbers are dropping. Why? Because she's untrustable. But no one would have known any of that had happened.
So in other words, he's saying, Congresswoman, that Benghazi hearings are really all about not what happened in Benghazi, but how can we drive Hillary Clinton's poll numbers down?
Well, we always knew that. But what's interesting is that it's not about Benghazi anymore. They have dropped the entire discussion about Benghazi because it didn't have legs. It wasn't real. But now the email server has legs, and so they're going with it. I mean, look what
for the same reason, by the way.
This is they sit in that office of his and smoke something every night because I mean this is all theater, and the efforts to undermine Planned Parenthood, to destroy it, not just undermine it but destroy it, are cooked up in his office over the course of weeks, and it's not just a one-on. It is a series of hearings that will take place, just like Benghazi. Every committee that had any jurisdiction had hearings, and then they decided to create a select committee, and now they're going to do the same thing with Planned Parenthood. It's really reprehensible. It is not governing. It is not governing.
No, it's using these committees and taxpayer dollars, right, to run their political agenda. You mentioned Planned Parenthood. I haven't been around this town that long, but certainly watched Congress for a long time from afar. I have never seen a hearing like the hearing on Planned Parenthood and the personal abuse and attacks on Cecile Richards.
I called
These
Cecile.
Guys have no limits, do they?
I called Cecile after the hearing to tell her how phenomenal she did.
She did.
She was
incredible.
She was really amazing.
I mean, and when Chaffetz, and they really have a cockiness to them that is very disrespectful. And there's a number of members on that committee. I served on that committee for 6 years. There's a number of members on that committee that are real bullies. And all they want to do is get their 20 seconds of fame on Fox by being the most belligerent, the most obnoxious person. And they do it over and over again. And they do it to public servants, and they do it to people that are really trying to do the right thing. You will never see in that hearing them bringing in GM or Volkswagen or any of the other entities that are corporate in nature, that are really creating physical risk, that are impacting the health and safety of Americans. But they will bludgeon someone like Cecile Richards. But she actually walked out of that hearing, I think, in great shape.
I agree.
When Chaffetz put up that ridiculous chart that showed abortions up and screenings down, and then you find out that it's actually from an anti-abortion group, and when you look at the chart more closely, it's not in relationship to anything. It is totally bogus. It's just disgusting. And I guess what bothers me most is that lies are allowed to be said over and over again, and they're not challenged, whether it's Carly Fiorina or members of the House. And I just find it just reprehensible.
Yeah. And there's something about women's health right?
What is it about women's bodies that they just they have to mess with?
No, it's a very weird obsession.
But it seems it's got to be to their political detriment, right? Don't they get it? I mean,
well, it hasn't
they say
been.
Don't use that phrase "war on women," but every time you turn around, they like trying to get contraception out of Obamacare coverage for. Why make that such a focus?
But here's the problem: they come in 2012. And the first bill they put up is defunding Planned Parenthood. Remember that? That was the very first bill they introduced.
I forgot. Yes,
and then if you look at it over the course of 2 years, what happened to them? They increased their numbers in the House. So, if you look at their tea leaves, it's suggesting to them that it's a winner when, in fact, it's going to be a real loser. I think Donald Trump has the traction he has today because they're fed up with what goes on here in Washington.
Robinson calling from out all the way on the West Coast. You know how early it is out there right now.
I wouldn't be up.
West Lynn, Oregon. Hi, Robinson.
Good morning, Congresswoman.
Why are you up so early?
I am in freight logistics. I manage truckers and railroaders, and they work 12 and 14-hour days, and we got to keep up with them.
There you go.
So if moderate Republicans and Democrats coalesced to a vote 277 to 151 yesterday against the Freedom Coalition, on December 11th, could those same Republican moderates and Democrats oppose the Freedom Coalition again?
Good question, Robinson. Let's go.
So here's what's interesting about that vote last night. There's like 39 Republicans that are in that Freedom Caucus. So you would have argued that you would have had many more Republicans voting for the the continuing resolution. So it was actually 60% of the Republicans that voted against the continuing resolution. So the moderates, frankly, are a very small number. And I was actually on the tram on the way over yesterday afternoon, and I was talking to one of those moderate Republicans who said, he was concerned that they didn't whip on that measure. And he says, I have to raise $500,000 just for a primary when I vote for the CR. So I want cover. If I'm just going to be one of a handful, then I'm going to vote with the herd. So they're all concerned about primaries. They're all concerned about their jobs. This is what it comes down to. It's putting my job above the country. And I sat in a hearing yesterday on cybersecurity where Admiral Rogers from the National Security Administration said that, and we were talking about being able to get the talent we need to be able to combat the cyber hacking that's going on. And he says, it is so hard for me to get that kind of talent, even though they want to help, when they see us in such disarray, when sequestration is always there, when shutdowns are always there. My people, the morale of my people is such that they just want to get the hell out of here and get a job where they can expect a paycheck.
Sure.
Every 2 weeks.
And then look at this, and as you said, that's why the outsiders are doing so well this year in the political system. So sexual harassment. The stuff that I read about what's going on in Capitol Hill, either members to staffers or staffers to staffers, pretty shocking.
It is shocking. And, there's an anonymous website that one staffer wrote in and says, my chief of staff, who's a woman, is harassing me. What should I do? And all the comments were, if you want to stay on Capitol Hill, you better not do anything about it. It is unacceptable on any level. When I was in the state legislature, this is going back 20 years ago, when Willie Brown was the Assembly Speaker. I went to him after he created a poster for his end-of-the-year bash that had a woman with a high heel on, stiletto heel with stockings, and it was very sexual in nature. And I had all the women in the Capitol sign the poster. I took it into him, and I said, "This cannot go on. You are telegraphing sexual harassment in this building. We need sexual harassment training." And to his credit, we passed a sexual harassment training requirement that everyone, both members and staff, must do every 2 years.
In the California legislature?
In the California legislature.
Does that exist here in Washington?
It does not exist here in Washington for members. Now, ostensibly, it exists here for staff, but there is really no training. So I've introduced a bill twice now to require sexual harassment training, and it's the weirdest thing.
I mean, after
members
Bob Filner, do we remember a name here about somebody?
Members do not want to have to touch it. They do not. I mean, I was talking to a member on the Rules Committee who says, "Oh, Jackie, this is just a bad idea. I'm thinking, education is a very good thing."
Yeah,
and that's such a because there are some people who just think that it's innocent fun, and that's how they grew up. And you talk about the telegraphing; they need to be checked. Like it's not a bad thing to have somebody check your privilege every now and then and say, "Hey, this is not good. This is not productive." So when you have that type of training and you put it in people's faces, it's powerful stuff. It's important stuff.
Well, I know a lot about sexual harassment training. I mean,
Sure.
I've been on this issue for a long time. I had the Office of Compliance come in and give my staff the training with me. Mm-hmm. And I learned things that I didn't know. Right. So, it's not that we all can't learn something from this.
Right.
They have not ever had one member make that request who wasn't in a scandal.
Right. So what happens if staffers do feel that they've been sexually harassed, either by a member or a staffer? There's really nothing they can do, is there?
No, they absolutely can, and they should. They should go to the Inspector General. They should go to the GAO. They should come to my office. I feel so strongly about this. I feel as strongly about this as I do, campus sexual assault and rape in the military. It is, an attitude from a bygone era. We are beyond that, and we have got to conduct ourselves in a manner that purports that we are upstanding Americans. That's why we're here in Congress. If you can't keep your zipper up, if you can't keep your mouth zipped, then, check out.
Any progress in the military?
Progress is very slow in the military. I got a number of amendments into the National Defense Authorization Act.
Right.
It goes to conference. About half of them got out. Now, that's after doing that heavy lift of getting...
Yeah, you and Kirsten Gillibrand and the Senate were, right on top of that issue last year.
And we have had some successes, but getting it out of the chain of command is a tough one. And I've always said this is not a sprint, this is a marathon, and we've just got to stay on it.
Right. Yeah, I'm telling you. Such a fighter. You're out there. Really. You don't give up, right? We don't want you to either.
No,
yeah.
What's the point of being here?
Exactly. No, fight the good fight for all of us, Congresswoman. Great to see you. Thanks for coming in. And good flight back to California.
Thank you.
All right. So
looking forward to going home.
All of our friends.
No showers, though. I got all my showers over there.
Use it up while you're here.
That's it.
Enjoy the water.
All right.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Julian Zelizer, Michael Levi, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.